So this should be an informative video. I recently did the comparison between the Gibson J-50 and the Epiphone Texan, which are guitars with a lot of similarities, a lot of things in common, comparing guitars of the same era, the same vintage, yet one of the biggest differences is the scaling. So I'm going to make a dedicated video talking about this subject. The guitars have a lot in common. They have a huge difference in feel. I'm going to talk about what scale length means and a lot of different subjects related to it because it is a fairly deep subject. So we'll get into what it is. But I have another guitar called the LG2 3/4. And that guitar is one that, because it's so small, it's constructed in such a way that certain chords, such as a chord that I find to be sort of irritating, spans across 4 frets. On that guitar, it's no problem at all. But on a guitar like this, I might be a lot more reluctant to play a song with that chord, with that particular setup. Just gotten used to that small one. So what is scale length specifically? Well, scale length is the distance that the string is vibrating freely from the guitar's nut all the way, you can't see here, all the way to the saddle that sits on the bridge here. Okay, that's the vibrating distance. Now, when you pluck a note or you apply a capo, you're effectively changing the scale length, modifying it, but it has to do with the way the guitar is designed by default. And different brands, different manufacturers tend to go towards different scale lengths in accordance with different models, such as a Martin 000, for example, versus the Martin OM. The distinguishable feature between those two is the scale length. That's what makes it an OM versus the 000. It's pretty interesting. Then you have your big Martin dreadnoughts. Some people might prefer Taylor, and they have a certain longer scale they go for. So the Epiphone Texan has a longer scale compared to the J45 or J50. And what does this mean practically? It has to do with the amount of tension on the strings, has to do with the amount of tension on the guitar top itself, particularly on the acoustic guitar. There's way more tension on the top with this longer scale, way more tension on the strings. You're going to be doing a lot less bending, probably by choice, and the scale length also affects things such as the warmth of the tone, the responsiveness of the tone, the brightness of the tone. It has a lot of fundamental factors. When you have this long scale, there's just so much tension on the strings that if you want to get into bending, such as real expressive style bending, you might prefer that J45 by comparison, because the shorter scale, less tension, it's got a more slinky feel. So it has a big effect on the way not only the guitar feels to play, but also practically how it sounds in a lot of ways. And certain people might be they'll never change their mind on the fact of, I will not play a guitar with this particular long scale, and they stay within a certain zone. Whereas I've adapted to a lot of different types of guitars. So I recommend you pay close attention to that live stream where I did the comparison and have a listen for yourself. Let us know what you think, because it is a pretty interesting subject. So I thought I would make the dedicated video, simply pointing out what it is for beginners. If you had no idea that, what is the scale length specifically? Well, like I said, the distance where the string's vibrating freely on its own between the nut here, this is where the string comes off, here, to where it rests, to where the string rests right here on the saddle, it sits on the bridge. This is the space where the string has to freely vibrate. And of course you get into capos and fretting notes, effectively changing the scaling, but we're talking about the way the guitar is designed by default. A Taylor might have a longer scale length. And even if I know I spoke about acoustics, but even electric guitars. I don't play a Telecaster because it probably would look like a mandolin in my hands, and it would probably feel like one. But the Telecaster would have the long scale, talking about electrics. Whereas if you had a Les Paul, for example, even though everyone says they're so heavy, they're so uncomfortable, for one thing, it'll have the shorter scale by comparison. You might prefer it that way. I only have one electric. I primarily have a fascination with owning many acoustic guitars. But it's a factor that plays into both. The thing is with the acoustic, though, the string tension, particularly on acoustic, affects the amount of tension that's being introduced to the top of your instrument. And that's just not a practical purpose. That's comes into the sound, comes into the tone, comes into things like the brightness, the warmth. It even affects the harmonics. And you might say the shorter scale would be the warmer sounding guitar. You might say the longer scale would be the one with more volume. And there's some people that just can't get on with the long scale. Which do you prefer? Write to me in the comments. But the long scale is a little unwieldy at times, I'll say. And there's so many factors in guitars: the nut width, the body shape. There's a lot, but this is an important one. So, just let me know your thoughts down below. If you want, I can do a part 2 on it. But otherwise, these guitars are pretty similar. The Epiphone and the Gibson of this vintage, if you think of Epiphone, it's a company with a rich history. Epiphone was a pioneer with making archtop instruments, and everyone was looking to Epiphone for clues. So if you think of Epiphone as this budget brand, you really don't know the history. This is, for all intents and purposes, a Gibson. It's just got it's got really an Epiphone neck, but it was produced the same woods, the same level of care. It's just Gibson eventually bought out Epiphone. But Epiphone is a legendary brand if you don't know any better. And it was an important comparison, comparing the 64 Texan to the late 60s Gibson of the same vintage. Very cool guitars, but despite their many similarities, very different in their own right. And one of those main differences would have to be the scale length. That's the standout factor. And if you had a sheet of the specs, that would be one of probably the main difference on paper. But it affects probably 3 main things: how the guitar feels, the amount of tension on it, on the top and on the string, so that goes into feel, and finally the tone of the instrument. Those are all things affected by scale length. And some people feel very strongly about it, whereas me, I feel I can play a huge variety of guitars. I can play a guitar made for kids, or I could play a guitar like this. I was looking at all my cases today, and this Texan in the jumbo case is the biggest case of all of them. And it's sitting right next to the LG 2 3/4 case. And despite the drastic differences, I can get on with both of them. But you might find the shorter scale opens up a lot of chords, because when you get further up the neck, the frets start getting closer together. It becomes more and more readily apparent. The shorter scale, the frets are going to be much closer. Okay, certain chord options are going to open up to you. And then on top of that, certain songs are going to become more available to you because it's less distance. Longer scale, more distance, change in the distance of the frets. And that comes in combination with the feel, the amount of tension on the guitar. And the tone has affected things, aspects of the tone are affected, like the brightness, the warmth. The J-50 is very warm sounding. The Texan has a ton of volume. A lot of decisions to think about when purchasing guitar. So I wanted to make this dedicated video about scaling, which I'm defining as the vibrating length of your guitar string, where it vibrates on its own, which breaks off here, right at the nut, and then rests right here in the saddle. Okay, here, all the way to here. And when you fret a note with your fingers, in a sense, you're changing the scaling, or you're at a capo, right? But there's a conversation to be had for the way a guitar is designed by default. Certain brands like Taylor, you might get on with that. Or a big Martin Dreadnought, typically they're going to have the long scale, right? Most J45s are going to have the short scale. A lot of research. And here we have the USA-made Texan from 1964, my newest guitar. I'm happy with it. And then you have certain differences even within very similar models. Like I spoke about the Martin Triple O versus the OM. You know, that would come down to strictly personal preference, because otherwise they're the same. The OM, otherwise known as orchestra model, just has the longer scale, but everything else is the same. So why do you think they do that? It's obvious it makes a big difference, doesn't it? So, and then you get into scaling combined with different body shapes. I mean, you got to find the guitar that works best for you in certain situations, and that's why I find I need more than one. So I have the Guild coming soon. I can't wait to show you guys that. I'm not sure if I should do the unboxing at the same time. I kind of wanted to do the two at the same time, but I'm going to play it by ear. Of course, the one day that I have to work extra is the day that they're supposed to be coming with it. So I'm going to figure that all out, and that should be a very, very exciting video. I'm excited for it. So I don't want to end this on, I want to end this like on 14 minutes or so. So let me know, guys, in the comments. I appreciate all the comments lately. Things have been going good. I don't make a video every day anymore. I just make it when I have something to say, and I think it makes it more you want to listen to what I have to say, because I'm not just churning out a video because I feel like I have to. I put a lot of planning into it now, and I think about what I'm going to make the subject on, like I always did, but I don't force myself to just put out something if I have nothing. I used to just pull out a video from the back burner and if I didn't have anything new. But now I sit and wait, and I think it makes the videos, the lessons, more impactful when I do it that way. So thank you, guys. Let me know your thoughts. And pay attention to that demonstration video I did in the live video. But until then, I'll talk to you soon.